view getting rendered, we have the basic cell. We did not customize the cell. This is a basic cell. Everybody with me? So for step 2 of our top bar controller, I'm sorry? Eric? Yeah, you can name the tab basic, that's fine. Okay, so for the second table view, this is the UI we're going for. It's going to be a custom cell that we create. So we create a custom class, a cocoatouch class. It's going to inherit from UI table view cell, and we'll have 3 labels, and we'll have 1 image. Everybody with me? Because if it's a custom cell, you could as well go further, right? You could go further, you could have more labels, right? Cool? All right, so this is the UI we're going for. So we are done with our first tab. Let's go to our UI. Let's go to the storyboard. And Eric, as you said, you could name your title differently if you want. So you could click on your item for your first view controller. Click on the first item here for the navigation controller, and go to Attributes Inspector. And we could simply name item to, we could call it subtitle cell. Or you could call it basic cell, sir. It's up to us what we call it. So here we have basic cell, and it appears in our tab title, subtitle cell, right? And if we run our app again, we could also give it an icon using SF symbols, which we'll do so we know where that is. Great, so our first title says subtitle cell. We do not have an icon, so we'll go ahead and we'll add an icon image, okay? So let's go back to our attributes inspector for our item. Do we all see where it says image here? Do we all see where it says image? So click on image, and again, as of iOS, what's my SF symbols? SF, what am I doing, circle? Again, as of iOS 13, we have SF symbols, so we have icons at our disposal, right? We have over 1,500 SF symbols, which is part of iOS now, so we could use one of them. So we could use one.circle to represent the first one, right? So here we have one.circle, and now we have an image. Now we have an image showing the first tab. We'll do the same thing for the second and the third. Cool? Great. So let's keep going. For the second view controller, we'll do the same thing like we did earlier. We'll drag in a table view. So let's go ahead and drag in a table view. So click on your object library, search for a table view. Again, make sure you set your constraints before you do anything else. Our constraints will be 0 all around. So 0 top, 0 leading, 0 bottom, 0 trailing. Add 4 constraints. Next step, I will add 1 prototype cell. I'll give that prototype cell an identifier. I could also call it AnimalCell. It's a different view controller, so there's no conflict here. That view controller was the custom cell view controller. Yeah, custom cell view controller. That's the second tab. So while we're here, we could rename the tab item. Tab item for this one is going to be, we could simply say custom cell. And for the image, we could say 2.circle. Run our app and make sure we have that rendering on our application. So here we have our subtitle cell, and we have our custom cell with our table view. So at most, you should now have, at minimum, sorry, we should now have a table view. Do we have a table view on our second tab? Great. So let's keep working with that. Give it a title in our nav bar. I'll also call it custom cell here for the title. And let's start working on our cell UI. So we have a title, we have an item name. Cool. So let's go ahead and set up our UI. The UI for the cell is going to be very similar to this UI we have here with our zoo animals. So if we go back to our storyboard, you could basically drag the cell down. So drag the cell to about where we think it should be. Whatever we change here does not affect the actual cell when we run our application. That height, right, no matter how convenient it might look, it doesn't render as that height when we run the application. Okay? With that particular cell, we'll actually make use of UIViewDelegate as we go to the view controller. We'll see what that looks like. Okay? But for now, let's just set up what the UI looks like. So we'll need an image view and we'll need 3 labels. So let's get an image view from our object library. I'll get an image view. Our cell will make it about 140 points high. So I will navigate over to the size inspector. I'll navigate over to the size inspector. Do we all see where it says height in the size inspector? Change that number to 140 points and press enter. Again, that height means nothing unless we explicitly return it in our view controller. Okay? Right now, it's only a visual thing that we're looking at. Visually, this is what we see. But when we run the application, we need to go one step further. We need to tell the delegate, return 140 points. Okay? All right. Let's keep working on our UI. My table view, right here. So my image view will be 140 points wide. So let's set the constraints for our image view. Click on the image view, go to add new constraints. We'll pin it to the top, we'll pin it to lead in, we'll pin it to the bottom, and we'll set the width only to 140. All right, not 149, but 140. So let's go ahead and do that. So the top is 0, lead in is 0. When I say top, top of the cell. The image top is the top of the cell. The image leading edge is the leading edge of the cell. So it's going to be pinned all 3 sides of the cell, okay? And 0 to the bottom. And for the width, I will set it to 140 points. And I'll say add for constraints. We have 4 constraints. So that's 3. Top, lead in, bottom is 3. Plus the width is 4. Yeah. I'm sorry? 0, yeah. So far, so good? So far, so good. Okay, for now, let's go ahead and drag in some labels. So let's look for labels here. Drag a label. What do we have? We have, okay, cool. So we have a label here. First label, I'll pretty much use the margins for the top. I'll option drag a new label for the bottom. And I'll option drag a third label for right at this guy's margin here. So we have 3 labels. Our first label is the name. So this is animal name. And this one is origin, right? No, it's the classification. Classification. And this one is origin. Again, it's a custom cell. We could move labels wherever we want. We could do whatever we want with our cell. Okay? That's the benefit of customizing something. Yes, you do some more work, but your thing it looks better at the end of the day. Okay, so let's set the constraints for our animal name. I'll use add new constraints. Bless you. I'll say add new constraints. I'll say 8 to the top. I'll say 8 to the lead-in, and I'll say 8 to the trail-in. Only 3 constraints. This is for the animal name. For the classification, I'll set the constraints for it. Say that again. Writing down doesn't help. With constraints, it's going to be harder. You could draw, but writing might be harder. Draw what we're doing. Okay, let's go back and do it. So I will Control Z here. So this one doesn't have any constraints right now. This one has constraints, this one doesn't, right? Luba, if you have any question in particular, please ask us. The animal name, we'll pin it to the top with 8 points between the top of the cell and the top of the animal name. 8 points, there's a space between it, a padding. We say 8 to the lead-in of the animal name with the trailing of the image. So 8 points between it. With the trailing of the animal name, 8 points is the space, the pattern between the trailing of the animal name and the trailing of our cell. 3 constraints for the label. The label knows its width right now, it knows its height. We don't have to set that, right? Any questions about that particular constraint? With auto layout, it's about practice. Practice, practice, practice. You don't have to do it the way we did it. You could do it a different way to get a different way to set it up. Maybe you want it to be center, right? If I want to say classification is center, if I want to center it, what constraints do I need? I would want to make it center vertically, right? You could position this particular constraint here and say I want it to be centered vertically. So you want it to be centered vertically of what? Of what view? Julia, what view would it be centered vertically with? The cell. Or the UI image view. It could also be centered with that, right? That's also valid because the image view itself takes up the entire cell, the height. Cool? So we always lay out a view based on a next view, right? I lay the animal based on the cell. I lay the image view based on the cell. Okay? So let's go back here. Great. So let's go back and do the animal. So the animal name, I'll click on Add New Constraints. I'll zoom in here. We said 8 to the top. I want it to be pinned 8 points, padding to the top. Yulia, your eye gotta be on, right? Not Yulia, sorry, Luba. Right? 8 points to the top. Sometimes it's better to see what we're doing and then capture it. So I want it to be 8 points to the top, padding, space between the top of my label and the top of my cell. Next, we say we want it to be 8 points to the lead-in of the image view. The closest neighbor is the image view. 8 points between it. Right? There's a pattern there. If I want it to be right next to the image view, it's going to be 0. Let's see what happens as we do it together. As we do it together, let's see what's happening. So we do it one at a time. First, we do the image. If you have an X constraint that's not properly constrained, you'll get that happening. So first, you need to make sure your anchor, our anchor now is the image view. We're working off the image view and the cell. So the image view is constrained correctly. So we say 8 points between the trailing of the image view and the lead-in of my animal name. So 8 points here, and 8 points from the trailing of my animal name label and the trailing of my cell. 8 points between it. So here we have 3 constraints. And we say add 3 constraints. Cool? For classification, we want to do the same thing. For classification, I want it to be 8 between the bottom of my animal name. I want it to be 8 to the trailing. I want it to be 8 to the leader. Everybody? So we could go ahead and do that, right? So we click on classification, we click on add new constraints. No, I didn't change the width, just 8 points in all 3 sides of the label. So this is what we turn out to be. So this is constrained, this is constrained, this is done, image view is done, last we need to do origin. For origin, what I want to do is say 8 points from the bottom. So the bottom of the origin label will be 8 points from the bottom of the cell, and 8 from leading, 8 from trailing. Okay? Nothing for the top, because it knows its height. The origin, the label knows its height. It's about 21, yeah, right here. It knows its height. You see 21 points here? It knows its height. It knows the height of it. So we don't have to give it a height constraint. And we do not have to give it a height from the classification. We don't want to make that constant. It knows the height. It knows the width too. But for our width, we're saying the maximum width is going to be 8 points from the left and 8 points from the right. So the maximum you could grow width-wise is 8 points, whatever it is, 8 points from the left, 8 points from the right.
But basically the minimum constraints we have included basically leading and bottom.
Exactly. For the label, leading, bottom, and trailing. For that particular, for the origin label. Yeah. You're right. Exactly. Label buttons, text views, you need to give it a height and a size. UI views, you need to give it a height and a size. With content. If it has content in it, it knows its size. Cool? Good. Like the image view doesn't know its content, we have to give it a size. Right? But the label has an intrinsic, we call it intrinsic size. It has an intrinsic size. All right, great. Did we set that up? No. So let's go ahead and set up the origin. I click on add new constraints. And for this one, it's going to be 8 leading. It's going to be 8 bottom. And it's going to be 8 trailing. And we say add 3 constraints. And here, we're good. Lastly, I want to update my font style. Like we did yesterday, I want my font styles to be different. So the animal name will be a font style headline, and the classification and the origin will be font style sub-headline, right? Where do we go to do that? We click on the label. We click on the label. We go to Attributes Inspector. We go to font here. We click on the font type here. We click on where it says font system, and we go select one of the text styles. Yesterday we spoke about dynamic type. We want our fonts to be dynamic types. So here we'll select headline for animal name, right? We get that bold effect. And for classification, we'll select subheadline. For classification, we'll select subheadline. And for origin, we'll also select subheadline. Not regular, subheadline. Great. Any questions so far? So our cell has been laid out. We are done with our cell. Next step, we need to go create a cell class, right? We need to create a cell class to manage that cell. And our cell class will have 4 UI elements. It will have 1 IB outlet image. It will have 3 labels, right? So let's go ahead and create a cell class. We'll call it AnimalCell. So create a new file. It's a cocoatouch file. So Command N, cocoatouch class. Yes? Yesterday we started talking about custom cells. So to have a custom cell, you have to create a class that inherits from UI table view cell that manages the cell we just created. Right? Because the cell we just created is not a UI table view cell. UI table view cell doesn't know about those properties. We have to create a cell class. We'll call it AnimalCell. It's going to be a cocoatouch class, and its subclasses from UI. What is the subclass from? UI table view cell. Very good. And the name of our cell, we'll call it AnimalCell. We'll click next. We'll say create. And now we have an animal cell. So here, cocoatouch class created a file for us. It automatically imported from UIKit because the cocoatouch class. Our class is called AnimalCell. We chose subclassing from UITableViewCell, so we get a subclass in here, UITableViewCell. We get two boilerplate methods, a wake from nib, and we get set selected. Those two methods, we do not need them now, so we'll delete them. So now this is all we have. So we need 4 elements, right? So we need an IB outlet for our image, right? So animal image view is of type UI image view. And we have an IB outlet, animal name, right? Animal name label is of type UI label. We have an IB outlet animal, what's the second one? What's the origin? Thank you. Origin label, UI label, and what's the last one? Classification, right? Is it classification, the last one? So animal classification label, UI label. So Tiffany, this is where we need the configure cell, right? We do not need it, but it's best practice to create a configure cell function here, right? Why? Because it takes code away from the cell for row. Our cell for row is not having 4 or 5 lines of UI code. In our cell for row, all what we say is cell.configure cell, pass it the object that we want to configure, and this class takes care of it, right? Because that cell owns its UI, which makes sense, right? The cell knows about its image view, it knows about its label, so make it own that code. Don't put that code in the view controller.
What is the preference of the UI label over the
Text view over UI label. So text view allows you to scroll content, right? A label is static, there's no scrolling, it's just a static element. So function here, we have configure cell. What do we have coming in? An animal. So configure cell for animal, it's a zoo animal. So we have a zoo animal coming in, great. Now let's set up our UI elements. So we say animal image view dot image equal to UI image named animal.image number.description. So that sets up the image using the image number. For example, if we have 1, it gets access to the asset folder with the one symbol there. Next, we have our animal label. So animal label.text gets the animal name. Third, we have the animal origin label. That text gets the animal.origin. And lastly, we have animal classification label. That text equal to animal.classification. You guys want to stop here, or we have 10 more minutes? 10 more minutes, okay. Yes, sir.
Maybe I missed it, but usually we want to use say for animal when
That's more like an external name, so it reads better. So when you type in your cell for all back to like external and internal parameter names, the user sees, or the user of my function in cell for all, they see configure cell for animal. It reads better. So Swift and Apple really recommends the more readable as far as it's called like self-documentation. Like coding style is better for the API to say what it is, right? Yeah, cool. All right, cool. So let us get access. Are we done with the code here? Let's get access to our storyboard. So I click on my storyboard and I'll get access to the cell we just created. So this particular cell here, I'll open up my assistant editor. I'll open up my assistant editor and I'll option click on my animal cell. Option click on my animal cell. Option click on my animal cell so it comes up, right? Like we have on screen. Again, option click on your animal cell so it comes up on screen. So first of all, what do we need to do now? What do we need to do? If I need to connect, this guy doesn't connect right now. On Friday, we're like, hey, this thing doesn't connect. Like, what's happening? I have all my outlets. Yes, Christian. So Christian says we need to go to the identity inspector for the cell. So we need to click on our cell, open up our identity inspector for the cell, right, everybody? Make sure your cell is selected. Make sure it says UI table view cell here. Let's see, zoom in here. Do we all see UI table view cell? Right? Our first example today, it used a UI table view cell. This was fine. It wasn't a custom cell. We all here, right? It wasn't a custom cell. It was a generic, just UI table view cell, no customization there. Right now, we've dragged in our own elements to storyboard cell. We said we're going to create our own cell. So we have to give the cell a class name. So the class name in here, where it says UI table view cell, I type in my animal cell, and what do? Press enter. Make sure you press enter. Make sure this check is activated. What's that? Select your cell. Select your cell. Make sure you select your cell and option click your cell name in the navigation area. Make sure your cell comes up, your cell class comes up. And go to the identity inspector for your cell and change it to animal cell. Yes, sir? You might have to do the document outline. Yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's harder. You could actually just click on the table view, click back on the cell, make sure you see that little square. Yeah, yeah, but it's easier to go to the document outline. Okay, cool. We all successfully added our animal cell. Now we could drag from our cell class over to the storyboard. So first, we'll drag in the image view over to the image view, right? I'll drag in my animal image view outlet over to my image view in storyboard. Next, I'll drag my animal name label over to my animal name label. I'll drag my animal, did I switch something? Oh, origin will drag to origin. And lastly, we have animal classification. We'll drag over to animal classification. So far, so good? All right, great. Yes? I'm hearing whispers, I'm not seeing any. What's your question? Okay. All right, cool. So we have connected our cells successfully with our IB outlets. Okay? Okay, everybody, we good? Can we go to the view controller now? All right, let's go to the view controller. Let's close this out. We are done. Open up your navigation area. Click on your custom cell view controller. Now we're working with the custom cell view controller. Everything we just did earlier, we're doing now, minus the cell for all. Okay? So it's very fresh to our memory. First off, let's get rid of the boilerplate code we do not need. This is good practice here. All right, first up, what we need is, we need a table view. We haven't connected our table view yet. We need self-row. No. We have to do some more configuration in self-row. Not the same we had earlier. Okay, so first off, we need an IB outlet to our table view. So first off, we need our table view. Then we need, right away, we create our table view. Get in the habit of setting up your data source right away. Set up your data source. Go ahead and make sure you set up your extension. This extension is on my custom cell view controller here. And this is conforming to what? Mel, what is it conforming to? Right, so UI table view data source. Very good. So UI table view data source. And our two required methods, we have number of cells, number of rows in section. Right? For now, we return 0 here. And then we have, what's the next one, Matt? Watch over your notes. Cell for rows, right? Okay. Cool. So for this particular one here, we need to do some extra work because no longer are we accepting the generic UI table view cell. This is where we do the casting, Tiffany. This is where we say ask question mark to typecast it to the type we expect. So we'll use a guard statement to unwrap it because we know it returns an optional. And I'll say it's a cell. I'll say table view dot dequeue, same as we did before. My identifier is the same as we did before. It's an animal cell, the current index path. But now what do? We do the ask question mark, as we said earlier. Why? Because we need our cell to be of type animal cell, our custom cell. Right? That's why we say ask question mark. Typecast it to an animal cell. No longer is it a UI table view cell. Now it's my custom cell, my animal cell.
Oh, but animal cell you put before or you put animal cell and for this one?
Animal cell, the custom class we created.
So you have to put a second animal cell. Instead of an animal cell will be used for the first one.
They're decoupled. One doesn't know about the other. We have two different view controllers, but we're using the same identifier, but two different view controllers. So here we're casting it to animal cell. And we'll say fatal error here like we introduced yesterday. What does fatal error do? It what? Not just shows us, but it crashes. Then it shows us where we went wrong. So here we're explicitly going to crash the app if the cell is not found. So animal cell could not dequeue or failed to dequeue an animal cell. So this here, it crashes if animal cell is not set up correctly. Great. So now we go back to business as usual. We return the cell. We return the cell, but before we return the cell, we have to get the current object or the animal at the index path. Majid, how do we get the current object at the index path? What am I writing? What code am I writing on line 32? Cassandra? Oh, we first need to get the data, right? We don't have the data yet. Very good. So, while you guys are you guys still typing here? Yes, we need to get the data. So we need to do very similar to what we did earlier. We need to create some property, call it animals, and get the zoo animals, right? Cool? We'll come back. We have more code to write down here, but let's get our data first. We'll come back to self-RL. So for our data, more important here, data for the table view, very similar to what we just did earlier in the basic view controller. We have a property called animals. It's an array of zoo animals. It's not a section. This is not the section one. The section is the last one. Cool. So here we have this. Great. And we have our didSet property observer to reload our table view. And we'll have our load data, very similar to what we had before. It's coming, Mr. Matt. This is an empty array. It starts off with an empty array. We have to initialize it. And load data will simply set our animals array using our type property zoo animals. No, sir. But if in case we do want to have a filter later or anything else we have to do on our data, it's very useful to have an encapsulated function that we could call. And here we'll call load data. Make sure in your VD load you have your data source object getting set. Make sure you call in load data, which updates our animals array. And our animals array calls reload data. And lastly, well, one before the last, two more things to do. Second thing we will do, or first thing we'll do, is set up the self-RL. And lastly, we'll connect our table view. Connect the table view, and that should be pretty much good to go. Yes, sir? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. As long as it's connected. Okay? Cool. So let's keep going. Can we go down? Mel? Cool. All right, so let's go finish our, first of all, number of rows. We're not returning 0 anymore. We're returning animals.count. So make sure you update your number of rows in section. And lastly, not lastly, let's get the object. So Cassandra, you're telling us how to get the object. So let animal, so Cassandra says let animals, index path. Any questions about that class? Any questions about line 44? Now is the time. Here we're getting the current object at the index path. This is the index path. This is the current object, the current animal. And we'll configure the cell to end our self-RL. How do we configure the cell? We wrote a utility function in our cell class. How do we configure the cell? Right? So, bienvenido, how do we configure the cell? I have a cell, I want to configure it with the animal object. I wrote a function in my cell class. How do I access that? How do I set that up? Cell dot configure, this is the function we wrote. and we pass in the animal, right? So the way it reads, it says cell, configure cell for animal. Greg? So it rolls better off the tongue. Does that make sense? It reads better. So your question earlier was, why do we have the for external name? So this is where it comes in handy. So when we set up the function, it reads configure cell for animal. Greg? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, so here we completed the cell for row. Lastly, the thing we need to do is connect the table view. So while more people are typing, connect your table view outlet to your storyboard. And that should be it, unless we forgot an identifier somewhere, or we forgot to change a class identifier somewhere. The code should work. Oh, we have one more thing to do. Aha, there's always one more thing. How are we doing with the cell for row? Are we done? My what? My computed property. Almost there. 5 more minutes and we're done. Get access to your storyboard. Click on your storyboard. Click on your storyboard. Bring up your assistant editor. Bring up your assistant editor. And connect your table view to your custom cell view controller. Everybody? Connect your table view over to your view controller scene. Okay? So that's connected. Did we connect? Okay, let me close. Let me go back to our custom cell. Go back to our custom cell. Run your application. Let's see what happens. Run the app. Run your app and let's see what happens. So our first table view renders as it did before. My second table view, it doesn't render as it should. Right, everybody? We have images coming in, right? All that is good, but the cell's height is a bit too high here. The cell height right now is a bit too high. I want to return a specific height for my cell. Everybody? Here I want to return a specific height for my cell. Everything works, right? But my height of my cell is too long, or too high, sorry. We explicitly gave our cell width, it was 140, correct? We dynamically did we laid out our view based on 140 pixels high. Everybody with me? So we need to return that height to our table view. The last question is, how do we do that? We do that using the UIViewDelegate. The UIViewDelegate has a method on it called height for row. It asks the height for row, we return it the height for row. So that's the last thing we'll do to end the lesson. So let's go ahead and implement it. And again, we have a new protocol we're conforming to. Best practice, create an extension. Everybody? So create an extension right below so right now we have one extension. It's the data source extension. We'll create a new extension below our data source extension on the same view controller. So extension on my custom cell controller here is going to be UIViewDelegate. Right? The delegate methods start off with height for row, did select, will select. They're like verb items, right? Something will happen, an action will happen, right? So those are the delegate methods. Yes.
For our custom, for the view controller.
For the view controller, yes. I'm in the custom cell. That's the only one we're working on right now. The only thing we've done was cell for row. Make sure you're in the custom cell view controller.
I am. But it's saying that it's not conforming to the protocol.
Make sure you have cell for row and number of rows.
I do. It's telling me I need a number of rows in section.
You don't. Well, you need number of rows in section. Make sure you implement that. We implemented it here, number of rows in section. Number of rows in section is required and cell for row is required. Yes, Luba? As I said, yesterday we laid out based on the description's height. So the cell grew dynamically. Today we want to return an explicit height, 140 pixels. We could use the image as well, but I want to show us how to use the explicit height. We want to return 140. How do we do that? Using the delegate. Cool? All right, so let's keep going here. So we have our UIViewDelegate. Again, the UIViewDelegate has a lot of methods on it. We'll go more into detail with how many methods it has and what we could use, but the API documentation shows it, okay? But the only one we want to use right now is the one called height for row. So do we have our extension? Do we have our extension? In the extension, start typing in height for row and pressing enter. So start typing in height for row and press enter. It expects you to return some CG float. We'll return 140. Okay? We'll return 140 points because we laid our view based on 140 points. And we'll go up, lastly, we'll go up in UIViewDelegate. In UIViewDelegate, the last step to do, tableview.delegate equals self. Everybody, go to your UIViewDelegate. In the UIViewDelegate, put tableview.delegate equals self and run the app again. So tableview.delegate equals self and run your app again. 140 points. So here we have our first table view. We have our second table view. Right? We have our first table view and we have our second table view. We could change the aspect. I'm sorry? Oh, scroll down. For people who have the image not going all the way to the top, simply on your image view, change the content mode to aspect fill. Down here, are you there? So again, we're done pretty much, but for the image, make it aspect fill. A minute? So lastly, again, just change your image to aspect fill. So it takes up the entire frame of the image view. How do we do that? We go to our storyboard. We click on the image view for our custom cell. We go to the attributes inspector. We go to the attributes inspector for the image view, and where it says content mode here, do we all see content mode? I change it from aspect fit to aspect fill. I run my app again. For the image view, because we wanted to take up the entire frame of the image view. Because currently it was just fitting, like they had some space in between it. So if I click on my second cell here, it fills the frame of the image. Cool? So this is our custom cell here, part 2, right? Cool? Any questions before we end lecture? Yes, sir. No. If you do height for row with cell sizing, it's not going to work. Cell sizing is not going to work. Like we said yesterday, it's going to return you that height you returned. So it's going to override the cell sizing and it returns you 140, for example. So it's one or the other. Cool? Not just that, it depends on what you're going after. If you want the image itself to be the one resizing the cell, the image needs to be pinned 0 all around the cell. And it resizes the cell based on the image. With yesterday, we did it based on a label. So that's why we set it to 0. Right? Exactly. It depends on what you want it to grow as. Yes, Mel? Sure. Okay. So lecture ended, right? Lecture ended. We'll resume later. So for now, we ended. Cool.